I trusted love. I trusted happily ever after. I trusted that being a good girl pays. I trusted him. Rita, a kind-hearted girl from a wealthy family, falls deeply in love with Daniel, a charming man from abroad. Despite warnings, she follows her heart, marrying him and leaving her life of comfort behind. But what starts as a beautiful love story turns into a painful journey of endurance, betrayal, and self-discovery. As she struggles in unfamiliar land, abandoned emotionally and financially, she learns a powerful lesson: love should never come at the cost of self-respect. Rita had always been a quiet, well-mannered girl who never asked for much. Born into a wealthy family, she lived a comfortable life, but she had never been spoiled. She believed in kindness, patience, and, above all, love. When she met Daniel at a family friend's wedding, he was everything she had ever dreamed of: handsome, ambitious, and romantic. They started talking, and soon, a long-distance romance blossomed. Every call, every text message made her heart flutter. He spoke about their future together, painting a picture of a beautiful life abroad. Her family, however, had their doubts. Her father, a businessman, had always been cautious about people's intentions. "Are you sure he's marrying you for love and not for your family's wealth?" he asked one evening. Rita laughed it off. Daniel had never asked her for money. Wasn't that proof enough? Determined to prove everyone wrong, she decided to follow her heart. The grand hall was filled with shimmering chandeliers, cascading floral arrangements, and the murmur of excited guests. Every detail of the wedding had been meticulously planned, from the silk-covered chairs to the imported roses that lined the aisle. Rita, in a breathtaking white gown, stood at the altar, her heart pounding with anticipation. Daniel looked every bit the perfect groom, tall, handsome, and confident. But as he held Rita's hands, his grip was firm, almost too firm, as if he were claiming possession rather than pledging love. Among the sea of happy faces, her father sat stiffly in his chair, his eyes locked onto Daniel with an expression of unease. He leaned toward Rita's mother and whispered, "I don't trust him." Her mother squeezed his hand. "Rita loves him. We have to trust her choice." But her father's instincts screamed otherwise. As the priest spoke, Rita noticed something odd, a flicker of hesitation in Daniel's eyes. Was he nervous? Or was it something else? Her fingers trembled slightly, but she pushed the doubt away. This was her wedding day. This was the man she loved. When it came time to exchange vows, Daniel's voice was steady, but there was a practiced air to it, as if he had rehearsed these words too many times. "I will always take care of you," he said. The words sounded beautiful, but Rita's father clenched his jaw. Then, just as Daniel slipped the ring onto Rita's finger, a sharp gasp rippled through the guests. A woman in the crowd, someone Rita didn't recognize, had covered her mouth in shock. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who is she?" a guest murmured. "She looks like she knows something," another said. For a brief moment, Daniel's face turned pale, but he quickly regained his composure, tightening his grip on Rita's hand. Rita glanced at the woman, a strange feeling creeping into her stomach, but before she could process it, the priest's voice rang through the hall. "You may now kiss the bride." Daniel pulled Rita close, sealing their vows with a kiss. The crowd erupted in applause, drowning out the lingering whispers. Whatever doubts had surfaced, they were pushed aside, for now. But the moment the wedding ended, Rita's father turned to his wife and said in a grave voice, "Mark my words, this isn't going to end well." The excitement of the wedding still lingered in Rita's heart as she stepped off the plane, holding Daniel's hand tightly. She had left behind everything she had ever known, her family, her comfortable life, and the familiar warmth of her home, for the promise of love in a foreign land. But the moment they arrived at their new home, Rita's heart sank. The house was nothing like what she had imagined. She had pictured a cozy, well-kept apartment with bright windows and warm decor. Instead, she found herself standing in front of a rundown building with chipped paint and a creaky front door. The smell of dampness filled the air as Daniel unlocked the door with little enthusiasm. Inside, the apartment was small, barely furnished, and shockingly unkempt. A single couch with a broken armrest sat in the living room, a pile of unwashed clothes lay on the floor, and the kitchen sink overflowed with dirty dishes. The walls had cracks, and the air felt stale, as if no one had lived there for a long time. Rita turned to Daniel, trying to hide her shock. "This is our home?" Daniel let out an impatient sigh, tossing his jacket on the couch. "It's just a place to start, Rita. We can make it better." She wanted to believe him, to tell herself that love could make any place feel like home. But the unease in her chest grew stronger. As the days passed, the reality of her new life sank in. The fridge was nearly empty most days, and when she asked Daniel about money for groceries, he brushed it off. Just manage for now. Things will get better. One evening, exhausted from cleaning the apartment, she suggested they go out for dinner. Daniel scoffed. Do you think we're made of money? We're not in your father's mansion anymore, Rita. The word stung. She wasn't asking for luxury, just a simple meal outside. But she swallowed her hurt and forced a smile. The honeymoon phase had ended far too quickly, and the dream she had envisioned was beginning to feel like a nightmare. Inside, the apartment was small, barely furnished, and shockingly unkempt. A single couch with a broken armrest sat in the living room, a pile of unwashed clothes lay on the floor, and the kitchen sink overflowed with dirty dishes. The walls had cracks, and the air felt stale, as if no one had lived there for a long time. Rita turned to Daniel, trying to hide her shock. This is our home? Daniel let out an impatient sigh, tossing his jacket on the couch. It's just a place to start, Rita. We can make it better. She wanted to believe him, to tell herself that love could make any place feel like home. But the unease in her chest grew stronger. As the days passed, the reality of her new life sank in. The fridge was nearly empty most days, and when she asked Daniel about money for groceries, he brushed it off. Just manage for now. Things will get better. One evening, exhausted from cleaning the apartment, she suggested they go out for dinner. Daniel scoffed. Do you think we're made of money? We're not in your father's mansion anymore, Rita. The word stung. She wasn't asking for luxury, just a simple meal outside. But she swallowed her hurt and forced a smile. The honeymoon phase had ended far too quickly, and the dream she had envisioned was beginning to feel like a nightmare. Rita tried her best to adjust. She cooked, cleaned, and remained patient, believing that love required sacrifices. But Daniel was changing. At first, it was small things. He would come home late without explanation, his phone always buzzing with messages he never let her see. He started locking his phone, something he had never done before. One evening, she prepared his favorite meal, setting the tiny dining table with care. When he finally walked in, he barely acknowledged her before sinking into the couch. Daniel, dinner's ready, she said softly. I'm not hungry. Rita hesitated. But I made your favorite. I said I'm not hungry, Rita, he snapped, his voice sharp. She recoiled. Daniel had never spoken to her like that before. Later that night, she woke up to whispers. Daniel was in the other room, talking in hushed tones. I'm handling it, he hissed. She doesn't need to know anything. Rita's heart pounded. Who was he talking to? What didn't she need to know? The next morning, she found unopened bills shoved into a drawer. Electricity, water, rent, overdue. Panic rose in her chest. Daniel, why haven't these been paid? He grabbed the papers from her hands, his face darkening. Stay out of it. I'll handle it. But deep down, she knew he was lying. Rita sat in their bedroom, scrolling through the messages on Daniel's old laptop while he was in the shower. She never believed in snooping, but her instincts screamed that something was wrong. What she found made her stomach drop. Debt notices. Unpaid loans. A long list of overdue bills. But the worst part? A series of messages between Daniel and an unknown contact. Did you get anything from her yet? No, she doesn't ask her family for money. What was the point of marrying her then? Rita's hands trembled. Was this some sort of misunderstanding? She felt like she was suffocating, like the walls of their tiny apartment were closing in on her. She barely heard the shower stop until Daniel walked in, drying his hair. When he saw the open laptop, his expression darkened. What the hell are you doing? Rita stood up, her voice shaking. What is this, Daniel? Who are you talking to? Why are they asking if you got money from me? For a second, he hesitated, then his face twisted with anger. He slammed the laptop shut and stepped closer to her. You had no right to go through my things. Tears burned in her eyes. You lied to me. You told me we'd build a life together, but all this time, I had no choice, Rita, he shouted. Do you think life is easy here? I had debts before we got married. I thought you would help, but you act like some helpless girl, refusing to ask your father for money. She stared at him, feeling like her world had just collapsed. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. You married me for my family's money, she whispered. Daniel scoffed. And you married me for love. Looks like we both made a mistake. Rita felt something inside her break. The illusion of her perfect love story had shattered into a million pieces. Rita sat on the edge of their lumpy mattress, staring at the crumpled bills in her hands. The reality of their financial crisis loomed over her like a storm cloud. She had spent weeks hoping Daniel would turn things around, but it was clear, if she didn't act, they would sink even deeper. Her fingers hesitated over her phone. She could call her father. He would help in a heartbeat. But Daniel's words echoed in her mind, you act like some helpless girl, refusing to ask your father for money. No. She would not be seen as weak. The next morning, Rita put on the plainest clothes she owned and stepped out into the bustling city streets. She wandered past sleek office buildings and luxury boutiques, places she once belonged to, until she found a small cafe with a help wanted sign taped to the window. Are you sure you want this job? The manager, a middle-aged woman, asked skeptically. You don't look like someone who's worked in a place like this before. I'm willing to learn, Rita said, forcing a smile. Her first day was grueling. She spilled coffee, burned her hand on a tray, and struggled to keep up with the orders. But the hardest part was when she saw Daniel. He was sitting at a table with some friends, laughing and carefree, as if their life wasn't crumbling. When she approached, his face darkened. What the hell are you doing? He hissed. Working, she said simply, setting down his coffee. Daniel grabbed her wrist. Are you trying to humiliate me? Rita yanked her hand away. You humiliated yourself, Daniel. For the first time, she saw it, a flicker of fear in his eyes. Fear that she was slipping out of his control. That night, Rita lay awake, her body aching from hours on her feet. Daniel was in the next room, talking in hushed tones. She crept closer, pressing her ear to the door. She got a job at some cafe, he was saying. No, she still hasn't asked her father for money. A pause. I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act. Rita felt the blood drain from her face. This act? She pushed the door open. Daniel spun around, eyes wide with guilt. Who are you talking to? She demanded. None of your business. Her gaze dropped to his phone, and before he could stop her, she snatched it. Her hands trembled as she read the messages. Unknown contact, she's useless if she won't get money from her family. What's your plan? Daniel, just give me time. I'll find another way. The truth hit her like a punch to the gut. You never loved me, she whispered. This was all a lie. Daniel grabbed the phone back. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, she screamed. For the first time, Daniel was silent. She turned away, her heart pounding. She needed to get out. The apartment felt colder after that night. Daniel barely spoke to her, only grunting in response when she tried to talk. He came home later and later, sometimes not at all. Rita sat alone at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair across from her. She still cooked for him, still held on to some foolish hope that things could change. One evening, she heard the door unlock at nearly 2 a.m. Daniel staggered in, reeking of alcohol and perfume. Where were you? She asked quietly. He smirked, throwing his jacket on the floor. Why do you care? Rita clenched her fists. Because I'm your wife. Daniel chuckled darkly. Are you? Because I don't remember marrying a nagging housewife. Tears burned in her eyes. I didn't sign up for this either, Daniel. He waved a dismissive hand and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Rita standing there, feeling more alone than ever. She had given up everything for this man. And now, she was nothing but a shadow in her own home. Days turned into weeks. Rita worked tirelessly at the cafe, scrubbing floors, serving rude customers, and coming home to a husband who treated her like a ghost. One evening, she returned to find the apartment ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, furniture overturned. Her heart raced. Had they been robbed? Then she saw Daniel sitting on the couch, looking utterly unaffected. "What happened?" she asked, panic rising. He lit a cigarette, exhaling slowly. "I was looking for some money." Rita's stomach dropped. "You tore the apartment apart for money?" He shrugged. "I needed it." "For what?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't understand." That was it. The final straw. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel laughed bitterly. "And where will you go, Rita? You have nothing." She stared at him, realization dawning. That was what he wanted, to break her down, to make her feel like she had no choice but to stay. But he was wrong. That night, as she sat on the bed, her phone vibrated. A message. "Aisha, Rita, are you okay?" Her best friend. The one she had slowly lost contact with since marrying Daniel. Rita hesitated before replying, "No." Seconds later, her phone rang. She answered, and the moment she heard Aisha's voice, the dam broke. Rita sobbed, pouring out everything, Daniel's lies, his cruelty, the truth she had uncovered. "Rita, you need to leave him," Aisha said firmly. "I have nowhere to go. You have a family that loves you. They'll take you back." Rita wiped her tears. "What if they think I failed?" "Failing is staying in a place where you're not loved," Aisha said. "Go home, Rita." For the first time in months, Rita felt something stir inside her, hope. She wasn't alone. And she wasn't staying. Rita sat on the bed, gripping her phone tightly as Aisha's words echoed in her mind. "Go home, Rita." But how? She had no money, no plane ticket, and Daniel controlled everything. If he found out she was planning to leave, she didn't know what he would do. A loud crash from the living room made her jump. She crept to the door and peeked through the crack. Daniel was hunched over the coffee table, slamming his fists against it. "Useless," he growled, his voice slurred with alcohol. "I bet she's hiding money somewhere." Rita's heart pounded. He was looking for more money. Again. She backed away slowly, her mind racing. If she didn't leave now, she might never get the chance. She grabbed the small bag she had secretly packed earlier, just a few clothes, her passport, and a necklace her mother had given her. Her fingers trembled as she texted Aisha. "Rita, I'm leaving tonight. Can you help me get a ticket?" Aisha, "Yes. Stay quiet and go straight to the airport. I'll send the details soon." She took one last look at the miserable apartment that had become her prison. Then, gathering all her courage, she tiptoed toward the front door. Just as she reached for the handle, Daniel's voice cut through the silence. "Where do you think you're going?" Rita froze. Daniel stood in the doorway to the kitchen, his bloodshot eyes locked onto her bag. "You're leaving?" She tightened her grip on the strap. "Yes." He let out a dry laugh. "And where do you think you'll go? Back to your daddy? You think he'll take you back after you abandoned him for me?" Rita lifted her chin. "Yes. Because unlike you, my father actually loves me." His expression darkened. "You're not leaving." Rita's pulse skyrocketed. "Daniel, move." He took a step toward her, and for the first time, she felt a real fear that he might hurt her. But then, bang! A knock on the door startled them both. "Open up. It's the police." Rita's eyes widened. Aisha. She must have called them. Daniel's face twisted in anger, but he knew he couldn't fight this. He had no choice but to step aside. With one last look at him, the man she had once loved but now barely recognized, Rita walked out. She was free. The cold night air hit Rita as she stepped onto the street. A police officer guided her to a car, asking if she needed a safe place to stay. She shook her head. "I just need to get to the airport." Aisha had already booked a ticket, and in a few hours she would be on a flight back home. As she sat in the back of the police car, staring at the city that had once symbolized love and new beginnings, she felt an overwhelming wave of emotions. Regret. Pain. Relief. Her phone buzzed. "Aisha, I'm so proud of you." Tears welled in Rita's eyes. She had felt so alone for so long, but now, she finally had someone on her side again. The airport was eerily quiet at this hour, the fluorescent lights casting a dull glow over the empty terminal. Rita clutched her ticket, afraid that at any moment, Daniel would appear and drag her back. But he didn't. She walked through security, boarded the plane, and as the engines roared to life, she allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in months, she felt safe. But as the plane took off, a new fear settled in her chest. What would her family say when she arrived? Would they welcome her back? Or would they see her as a failure? She had no answers. All she knew was that she was going home. The moment Rita stepped off the plane, her stomach twisted in knots. She scanned the crowd, half expecting no one to be there. After all, she had left without looking back. Why would they be waiting for her now? Then she saw them. Her father stood tall, his face unreadable, hands clasped behind his back. Her mother, however, had no such restraint. The moment she spotted Rita, she gasped and ran forward. "Rita!" Rita barely had time to react before she was engulfed in her mother's embrace. The scent of home, jasmine and vanilla, wrapped around her like a safety net. "My baby, you're home," her mother whispered, clutching her tightly. Tears spilled down Rita's cheeks as she clung to her. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry." "Hush, my love. You're safe now. That's all that matters." Then, hesitantly, she turned to her father. He was still watching her, his expression unreadable. "Daddy," she whispered. He didn't move for a moment. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he approached. She braced herself for his disappointment, for his anger. But instead, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I was angry," he admitted. "But never at you." Rita's breath hitched. Her father sighed, his voice thick with emotion. "I was angry at myself. Because I let you go when I should have fought harder to keep you." Rita broke down. She had expected blame, resentment. But instead, she had found unconditional love. Her father pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in a long time, Rita felt like a daughter again. But just as she was beginning to believe she could heal, her mother's voice cut through her relief. "Rita, my love, we need to talk." Rita pulled back, wiping her tears. "What is it?" Her mother exchanged a look with her father before speaking carefully. "Daniel has been calling. He says he's coming for you." The world tilted. Rita's heart slammed against her ribs. "What?" Her father's grip on her tightened. "Don't worry, sweetheart. He will never touch you again." But the fear in her mother's eyes told Rita one thing. This wasn't over yet. Rita's hands trembled as she clutched the cup of tea her mother had given her. The warmth did little to soothe the chill that had settled in her bones. "Daniel has been calling," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father's face was as stern as ever, but she could see the fire in his eyes. "Yes. He called your mother first, pretending to be worried about you. When she refused to talk to him, he called me." Rita swallowed. "What did he say?" Her father exhaled heavily. "That he loves you. That you're confused. That he's coming here to fix things." Rita felt sick. Daniel wasn't giving up. Her mother took her hands. Sweetheart, you don't have to be afraid. You're home now. Home. She had wanted this for so long. But could she truly escape Daniel? The house was quiet that night, but Rita couldn't sleep. Every shadow outside her window, every creak of the floorboards made her heart race. Then, around midnight, her phone buzzed. She picked it up with shaky hands. Unknown number, did you really think you could leave me, Rita? Her blood ran cold. She typed a response before she could stop herself. Stay away from me. The reply came instantly. Unknown number, you belong to me. And I'm coming for you. The phone slipped from her hands. She wasn't safe. Not yet. The next morning, Rita's father made a decision. You're leaving the city, he said firmly. Daniel is dangerous, and I won't risk him coming here. Rita's mother nodded. We have relatives in the countryside. You'll stay with them until we make sure Daniel is out of the picture. Rita hesitated. She had just returned home, was she already being forced to run again? But then she remembered Daniel's message. You belong to me. Her father arranged everything quickly. By noon, she was in the back seat of a black SUV, driven by one of her father's most trusted employees. The plan was simple. She would stay hidden for a few weeks until her father's legal team handled Daniel. But Rita underestimated just how far Daniel was willing to go. 3 hours into the drive, as they passed through a deserted highway surrounded by thick trees, the SUV suddenly jerked to a stop. Rita's heart slammed into her ribs. What's happening? The driver frowned, looking at the road ahead. A black car was parked sideways, blocking their path. A man stood beside it, waving them down. I don't like this, the driver muttered. Before Rita could respond, she saw another figure step out from the trees. Her breath caught in her throat. Daniel. The driver cursed and threw the car into reverse, but another vehicle slammed into them from behind. They were trapped. Daniel approached the SUV slowly, his eyes locked on Rita. His lips curled into a smirk. Going somewhere, sweetheart? The driver reached for his phone, but Daniel's men moved fast. In seconds, the door was wrenched open, and Rita was dragged out. She fought, kicking and screaming, but Daniel grabbed her wrist and pulled her close. You should have known better, he whispered. Tears streamed down her face. Let me go, Daniel. He chuckled, tightening his grip. You're mine, Rita. And no one leaves me. A gunshot rang out. Daniel's men froze. Rita turned her head and saw a second black SUV speeding toward them. Her father's men. Daniel cursed, yanking her toward his car. Get in. But before he could force her inside, Rita bit his hand hard. He held in pain, loosening his grip just enough for her to break free. She ran. Tires screeched, more gunshots echoed, and chaos exploded behind her. Then, arms wrapped around her. For a moment, she thought Daniel had caught her again, but then she heard a familiar voice. Rita, I've got you. It was her father. Safe. For now. The next 24 hours were a blur. Rita was taken to a private estate outside the city, where security guards surrounded the property. Her mother was already there, waiting for her with open arms. You're safe now, her father assured her. But Rita knew it wasn't over until Daniel was out of their lives for good. The news broke the next day. Wealthy businessman arrested for fraud, assault, and illegal activities. Daniel's face was plastered all over the television. His empire had crumbled overnight. The debts he had tried to cover up, the scams he had run, it all came crashing down. But what truly made Rita feel victorious was when she saw the footage of his arrest. He was dragged out of his penthouse, screaming, "This isn't over. She's mine. She belongs to me." But no one listened to him anymore. The final blow came when Rita's father handed her a document. An annulment. It's already in motion, he said gently. You'll never have to see him again. Tears filled Rita's eyes. For so long, she had believed she was trapped. That she had no way out. But now, holding that paper, she realized something. She had won. She was free. For the first time in a long time, Rita smiled. Her life was finally her own. The storm had passed, but the wreckage it left behind still weighed heavily on Rita's heart. Daniel was gone, arrested, humiliated, and stripped of his power. The annulment was in motion. Her father had assured her that she would never have to see him again. But why did she still feel like a prisoner? She stood by the window of the estate, staring at the sprawling gardens. The world outside was peaceful, yet inside, her mind was a battlefield. She flinched at sudden noises. She avoided looking at her phone, afraid of seeing another message from an unknown number. She hadn't slept properly in days, haunted by the memory of Daniel's grip on her wrist, his voice whispering, "You belong to me." "Rita?" She turned to see her mother standing in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "You haven't eaten all day," her mother said softly, carrying a tray of food. "Please, my love. You need to take care of yourself." Rita forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mama." Her mother sighed, setting the tray down on the bedside table. She reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind Rita's ear, just like she used to when Rita was a child. "You're not fine," she whispered. "And that's okay." Rita clenched her jaw. "I should be happy. Daniel's gone. I won. So why do I still feel like I'm not free?" Her mother sat beside her, taking her hand. "Because scars don't heal overnight, my love. You spent months trapped in fear. That doesn't disappear just because he's behind bars." Rita's eyes filled with tears. "I just want to feel normal again." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Then let me help you." And for the first time, Rita let herself cry. She let herself grieve, not just for the pain Daniel caused her, but for the girl she had lost along the way. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Rita started to reclaim her life. She took long walks in the garden, breathing in the fresh air. She reconnected with old friends, including Aisha, who visited her often, showering her with love and laughter. She even picked up painting again, a hobby she had abandoned when she married Daniel. But just as she started to feel like herself again, the past came knocking. One evening, her father called her into his study. "There's something you should see," he said, sliding a newspaper across the desk. Rita's stomach twisted when she saw the headline. "Daniel Kingsley requests bail, claims he was framed." Her fingers clenched the paper. How is this possible? He was arrested for fraud, illegal dealings, and assault. Her father's expression was grim. "Money still talks, Rita. Even from prison, he has allies working for him. His lawyers are pushing for bail, claiming he was set up." Rita felt sick. "If he gets out." "He won't," her father interrupted. "I've already spoken to my legal team. We have evidence against him that can't be ignored." Rita nodded, trying to steady her breathing. But deep down, fear slithered its way into her heart again. Would she ever truly be free of Daniel? That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every shadow in her room reminding her of the man who had tried to destroy her. Then, her phone buzzed. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached for it hesitantly, her hands shaking. It was a message from an unknown number. "Unknown, miss me, sweetheart?" Rita's blood ran cold. He wasn't done with her. The next morning, Rita felt like she was suffocating. She showed her parents the message, and her father immediately called his security team, reinforcing their protection. Her mother begged her to stay inside the estate until everything was resolved. But Rita had had enough. She was done living in fear. With Aisha by her side, she decided to take back her life. They went shopping, visited cafes, and walked around the city, simple things she hadn't done in months. And for a while, she felt normal. But then, as they sat at a quiet cafe, she saw him. At first, she thought she was imagining it. A man in a suit, sitting by the window, sunglasses shielding his eyes. But then he turned his head slightly, and her heart stopped. Daniel's right-hand man. Aisha noticed her tense up. Rita? What's wrong? Rita's lips parted, but she couldn't speak. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone, snapping a quick picture of the man. Aisha followed her gaze, and when she saw the man, her expression darkened. Is that? Rita nodded. Aisha grabbed her hand. Let's go. Now. They hurried out of the cafe, but as they stepped onto the busy street, Rita made the mistake of glancing back. The man was watching her. Not just watching. He smirked. Terror gripped her chest. She wasn't being paranoid. She wasn't imagining things. Daniel's men were still following her. She wasn't safe. Not yet. Rita's heart pounded as she and Aisha wove through the crowded streets, trying to lose the man tailing them. He's still behind us, Aisha whispered, gripping Rita's wrist tightly. Panic surged in Rita's veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had come too far to fall back into Daniel's trap. They turned a sharp corner into an alley, their footsteps echoing against the brick walls. Aisha glanced back. I think we lost him. But before Rita could feel relief, a black car screeched to a stop at the alley's entrance. Her stomach dropped. The back door swung open, and a familiar voice sent shivers down her spine. Rita, get in the car. Daniel. Her breath caught. She had seen his face plastered all over the news, arrested, disgraced, broken. Yet here he was, standing right in front of her. He had found her. Aisha tightened her grip. Rita, run. They bolted down the alley, but the sound of heavy footsteps followed close behind. Aisha yanked Rita toward a side door, shoving it open. They stumbled into the back of a restaurant kitchen, startling the staff. Sorry, emergency. Aisha shouted, pulling Rita through the maze of chefs and waiters. Rita heard the kitchen door slam open behind them. Daniel's men were right on their heels. A chef pointed toward the front entrance. That way. They burst out onto the street and spotted a taxi pulling up at a red light. Aisha flung the door open. Drive. Just go. The driver, startled but cooperative, sped off just as Daniel and his men emerged from the alley. Rita turned back, locking eyes with him for the briefest moment. His expression was twisted with rage and obsession. This wasn't over. Not yet. The moment Rita got back to her parents' estate, she knew she couldn't run anymore. Daniel had crossed a line. He wasn't just sending messages, he was chasing her. And that meant he was desperate. Her father was already on the phone, calling in his private security team. No more chances, he told Rita. This ends now. Aisha nodded. We need to set a trap for him. Rita hesitated. A trap? Aisha's eyes burned with determination. Daniel is too arrogant to stop. He thinks he owns you. We'll make him believe you're scared and vulnerable, lure him in, and make sure this time he has nowhere to run. Her father's men got to work, alerting law enforcement and setting up surveillance. They used a burner phone to send Daniel a message. Rita, I need to talk. I can't live like this anymore. Meet me at the old pier. The bait was set. That night, Rita stood at the pier, the waves crashing violently against the dock. She hugged her coat around her, the cold wind biting at her skin. Then, footsteps. She turned. Daniel emerged from the shadows, his usual smugness replaced with something more sinister. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken. He looked like a man losing everything. You finally came to your senses, he said, stepping closer. I knew you would. Rita swallowed her fear. I just want this to end, Daniel. A twisted smile crossed his face. It will. You and I will leave together. You know that's the only way this ends. Rita clenched her fists. No. The only way this ends is with you behind bars. Sirens blared. Daniel's smirk faltered as headlights from police cars flooded the dock. Men in suits, law enforcement and Rita's father's security, surrounded them. Rita stepped back. It's over, Daniel. His face contorted with rage. You tricked me. Before he could lunge at her, officers tackled him to the ground. He thrashed, screaming her name, his voice filled with unhinged desperation. Rita! You're mine! She watched as they dragged him away, his shouts growing distant. And just like that, it was over. She let out a shaky breath, feeling lighter than she had in months. Daniel was gone. For good. The weeks after Daniel's final arrest were a blur. The trial was swift. The overwhelming evidence, from his fraudulent activities to the attempted kidnapping, sealed his fate. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Rita sat in the courtroom, watching as he was led away. He didn't look at her this time. His power was gone. Aisha squeezed her hand. You're free. And for the first time, Rita felt it. Free from the fear. Free from the chains of her past. She returned home, but this time, she wasn't the same broken girl who had fled from a nightmare. She was stronger. She took time to heal, embracing therapy, rebuilding her confidence, and reconnecting with her passions. She even decided to start an organization to help women in abusive relationships escape and rebuild their lives, because she knew she wasn't the only one who had suffered. One evening, as she stood on the balcony of her home, watching the sunset, her mother joined her. You seem happy, her mother said, smiling. Rita exhaled, feeling the weight that had once suffocated her, completely gone. I am, she said. And she meant it. She had been through hell, but she had survived. She had won. And her new life was just beginning. As Rita fought to regain control of her life, she found comfort in an unexpected place. Ethan. He was the lawyer her father had hired to handle Daniel's case. Tall, kind, and patient, he never treated her like she was broken. At first, Rita was distant. The thought of trusting another man felt impossible. But Ethan never pushed. He was just there. One evening, after a long legal meeting, he found her sitting alone on the terrace. You don't have to be strong all the time, he said softly. Rita laughed bitterly. I don't know how to be anything else. Ethan hesitated before saying, you were strong to survive, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, Rita felt something warm in her chest. Hope. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, she let Ethan into her world. They talked about everything, life, loss, dreams. One night, as they walked by the lake, she whispered, I'm scared of love. Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady. Then let's start with trust. She swallowed hard. And if I can't? He smiled. Then I'll wait. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was healing. And that was enough. 1 year later. The sun rose over the city, casting golden hues over Rita's balcony. She stood there, sipping her morning tea, the crisp air filling her lungs. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. Her organization, Phoenix Haven, was thriving. She had dedicated herself to helping women escape abusive relationships, providing legal aid, housing, and emotional support. She had turned her pain into purpose. The media had dubbed her a warrior for women. But to her, she was just someone who refused to stay silent. Good morning, survivor, Aisha's voice called from inside. Rita smiled as her best friend walked out, holding 2 cups of coffee. You know, I could get used to this, Aisha teased. Morning coffee with the CEO of a women's foundation. Rita laughed. CEO? That makes me sound way too official. Aisha sipped her coffee. You are official. You're making a difference. Rita exhaled. It still feels surreal. Aisha nudged her. Well, believe it. You took your life back, and now you're helping others do the same. Rita nodded. She had fought for this peace, and she wasn't going to waste it. As she stared at the horizon, she whispered to herself, I'm finally free. And for the first time, she truly was. She had once been a prisoner of fear. Now, she was a beacon of hope. Her story had inspired many. Survivors reached out to her, thanking her for giving them the courage to leave toxic relationships. Her father hugged her tightly. You did this. Aisha wiped away a tear. I'm so damn proud of you. Ethan stood beside her, his support unwavering. They weren't rushing into love, but he had become her rock. As she stepped onto the stage to give her speech, she looked at the audience, women, survivors, warriors like herself. She took a deep breath. I once thought my story ended in tragedy, she said. But I was wrong. My story is about rebirth. Strength. And knowing that no matter how dark it gets, there is always a way out. The crowd erupted in applause. Rita smiled. She had fought. She had won. And she would never be afraid again. Rita's journey taught her that love is not about suffering. It is about mutual respect, trust, and care. She once believed love required sacrifice, but now she knew, true love should never demand that you lose yourself. And in the end, she emerged stronger, wiser, and truly happy. The end.